previously on 3.
So everyone in your family has seen the demon or felt something like it?
Every single person. 3 people came up to our door and told us, God sent us to pray for you and all you're about to go through. They told him he should have died. He said, I knew then I was cursed, and he'd laugh.
So why do you think that it wanted you?
I don't. I think it just wanted me to be afraid, or maybe it does. Either way, I refuse to let it run my life again like it did for so long.
So what about your mum's family?
Well, that would all have to start with a farmhouse in Shadowman. If I had an overall goal to this, it would be to help people understand those who go looking for things like this usually won't find it. It's not always a fun or exciting experience. Most of the time, what's out there beyond us isn't positive. The people that don't believe in this stuff, I get it. I wouldn't believe in it either if I were them, hadn't seen it, felt it, stayed up all night, literally tortured by it. Those who don't believe, sometimes it's better that way. If I was given the option to change having an ability or what happened to me, I literally would in a heartbeat. Being interested and educated is one thing, but dabbling in things you don't understand, well, you'll find out why that's not a good idea.
Well, let's begin then.
The question I get asked the most is this real? This can't be real. Everything you hear myself or my family discuss in these interviews truthfully happened to us. I didn't create this just for entertainment. These are real stories about hardship, death, and the curse that lingers throughout my family. I don't expect everyone to believe us, but whether you do or not, we can all agree this isn't a fairy tale story. This is what it's like to live a nightmare you cannot wake up from.
So you've told us about how this curse has been passed down through generations. So next on the family tree would be your mother's parents, right? So do they know that you're creating this?
No, they don't. So I have to be careful what I say because there are some of my family members that refuse to talk about everything that happened just in their own home, and especially the house.
So why do they refuse to talk about it? Is it out of fear or refusal to accept?
I thought about it for a while, why they disregard the existence of what happened then. Why are they in denial? They're the people that sat us all around the table at family gatherings, telling the stories of how haunted their farmhouse was, and all of the terrible things that happened, bringing out a Bible to show us that these occurrences were of the devil. They deny it now because of fear, and because of what else could become of it if it's brought to light. I'm not afraid, and I just want to find the source of this curse for my own sake and for the sake of my child.
What do they think of you having an ability? Your grandfather has an ability, right? Is he denying that now as well?
He does. He denies it all. 10 years ago, he did not. As far as my ability is concerned, they know the bare minimum. It's hard enough to have complete strangers telling me, you'll burn in hell, and I'm a witch for using an ability I don't even want, but to have my own family members look at me like I'm evil, that's not easy to swallow, especially when I was told my entire childhood, we aren't like everyone else. You get that from your mammy.
And who's mammy?
My maternal grandfather's mother.
So she's in the other relative on that side with an ability?
Yes, and she knew the most about this curse out of anyone in our family, and I wish I knew more from her specifically so that I could figure this out faster.
Well, let's start with her then. So tell us more about Mammy.
I only know about her from stories I've been told from my family members, but they all were the same stories. My mammy is 100% Cherokee Native American. She married her husband, whom is not Native American, at a very young age. I've heard that her parents were not happy about her marrying him, but she loved him so much she didn't care what her family had to say about it. I believe her parents were pretty stunned after she married him, so they completely cut her out. He was a coal miner, and my mammy was a mother almost immediately after they married. She had nearly 10 children, I believe. My grandpa was one of the youngest of all her children. They lived in the mountains of Kentucky, and most of the people living there did not even know how to write their names. My mammy would sign her name with just an X. She was a gentle, kind woman and a very godly woman. She didn't know how to read the Bible, but she always said, "It has so much power." I remember hearing a story about her telling my grandpa and my great uncle not to go messing with a certain spot in the mountains. My grandpa is a very adventurous person, much like me. He's always ready for a challenge. He went against her wishes, and he and my uncle went up into these mountains. It was a little cliff that hung off the side of the mountains, but inside of this cliff was a small little cave. They climbed around to the side of the cave, and when they looked inside, my grandpa said they both saw a man.
A living man, or...?
A man that was not living nor dead. This was the first time any of us saw Shadow Man.
Shadow Man. What does he look like? I mean, I'm gonna assume he doesn't look like you or me.
No, he doesn't. He's about 7 foot and 10 foot tall, maybe taller, I don't know. He has no features, and he is darker than the darkest place. When you walk into a pitch black room with no light, you could see him because he's so dark. Light will not go through him, and he is darker than night itself.
If Shadow Man isn't living or dead, then what do you think he is?
I don't know what Shadow Man is. That's a question I ask myself every single day. All of us do.
So what happened after your granddad and uncle saw him in the mountains?
They took off, and on the way back to their home to tell my mammy that they came across a huge rattlesnake. Snakes are common around the mountains of Kentucky, but my grandpa said this snake was no snake I ever seen. The snake hypnotized my uncle and was making my uncle talk in a strange language. My grandpa would always stop the story there and go on to when he had to tell my mammy. He said, "She beat us black and blue for going up there, and you can bet we never went back again." I cannot tell you how many times I've heard this story. My grandpa would sit at their breakfast table with a cup of coffee with me by his side late at night when my grandma went to bed. It was something I was always excited about, to hear him tell me these stories like they were forbidden stories. It always interested me. One thing I remember him saying was, "I ain't scared of much, but that man of the mountains, that was the devil on earth." He used to also tell me stories about how my mammy always knew when someone was gonna die.
And how would she know? Was it a feeling or a vision, or did something tell her?
She just knew. My grandpa told me she knew when family members were gonna pass. She said it was just certain that they'd die if she felt it, and she was never wrong. She tried to save many people, although nobody would ever listen to her.
And is there a story of her trying to save someone that you know of?
Yes. My uncle had a best friend, and we'll just call him Sam. Sam and my uncle were going to go off and do what teenage boys do best, cause trouble. My mammy told my uncle and Sam if they left, Sam would die. He'd get his head cut off. They laughed at her and didn't listen, and she begged them not to go. She was hysterical. My grandma didn't believe in this stuff, so she let them go. A few hours later, they got a call that Sam and my uncle were going across the bridge, and Sam was sticking his head out of the moon window in the car, and sure enough, was decapitated.
That's awful. I can't imagine what your uncle thought after that. Did your grandma change her mind on believing Mammy then?
I think deep down she did, but she was afraid. She refused to believe the spirit or supernatural was real, especially for any good purposes like saving someone's life.
Well, we probably all need to know more about your grandma and granddad, your mum's parents, that is. How'd they get to Illinois?
My grandpa moved away at the age of 15 to go to Illinois to look for work. In Kentucky, it was either coal mines or nothing, so he didn't want to do that. He wanted to do something different. He worked many labor-intensive jobs, though, and then moved on to work for the union for many, many years. It was a different union than coal mines. It was more of working for a specific city and taking care of the town. He drove snow plows, worked on repairing the roads, drove garbage trucks. He actually lost 3 of his toes on his left foot from getting them smashed in a garbage truck. He used to tell us growing up that a crocodile bit him off, and I believed it until I was about 12. My grandpa met my grandma, my mother's mom, at the age of 16, I believe. They met at a little park. My grandpa saw her, and they started talking, and just like that, they were a thing, and I got married shortly after. They had my mother first, then my uncle, and then my aunt. They had 3 children total. Do you want to know something crazy about where my grandma was living when my grandpa met her?
Yeah.
The road she lived on was called Shadowway Drive.
Wow. So that would be where your pappy and great-grandma lived too then, right?
Yes, and that's the first place my mom ever saw Shadow Man.
At Pappy's house?
Yes. There's still a few more things I'd like to add about my grandpa before we talk about that, though.
Well, we're all ears.
My grandpa also told me about another experience he had seeing something unknown as a child. His grandfather died. We will call him Willie. Willie and my grandfather didn't know each other well. My grandpa didn't tell me much about him. He said that there was a time after Willie died, he went up into his attic looking around at things. It was around the time of his funeral, so lots of family was there, and my grandpa just went exploring. He found a box that was never opened, and he said, made me want to open it even more. He said when he opened the box, there were Civil War uniforms in the box and other belongings. I'm not sure if they were Willie's or someone else's, but still. He said as soon as he picked it up, out of the box, the curtains that they had in an attic window moved. One curtain lifted up and sat back down. Then another curtain lifted up and sat back down. And then the third curtain lifted up and sat back down. He told me he was frozen and couldn't move. He heard something yell at him, "Get out!" And he took off running downstairs. He said, it scared the daylights out of me. Still have nightmares about it.
So it happened in threes, in an attic where your granddad was a child, a lot like your pappy story, isn't it?
It's scary similar. We really should count how many times we say 3 in this.
What else did your granddad experience, especially with his ability?
He always was in the right place at the wrong time. That's what he always told me.
So you think he might have been a psychic?
I think it was more than that, but I don't know. The first story he ever told me was when he was driving a snowplow on New Year's Eve. It was late, like 3 a.m. The roads were slick, covered in ice. He was coming down a hill in the snowplow, and at the bottom of the hill was a car that blew a stoplight. I'm pretty sure the driver was intoxicated, but I can't say for sure. The car got hit from the side and rolled a few times until it was standing up straight again. He immediately pulled over in shock and couldn't believe what he just saw. He saw accidents a lot, but not like this. He said that they had radioed for the police and the ambulance to come. He got out of the snowplow, and there was a woman holding a baby pacing back and forth. They were foreign and couldn't speak much English. They had 2 children in the back seat. One of the children had her feet stuck through the glass of a window and were severed. They were barely attached by muscle, maybe. The baby the mother was holding was thrown from the car during the impact. It landed about 15 feet from the vehicle. My grandpa kept begging the mother to let him try CPR, and finally she let him. My grandpa was certified in a lot of these things too, by the way. And when he picked up the baby had already passed. He took off his winter coat, wrapped the baby in his coat, and then the ambulance arrived. 5 years later, I end up being in the same 4th grade class with the 2 children that were in the back seat. The girl was saved because my grandpa told her not to move, and he sang songs to her to distract her. The other child was a male who actually ended up becoming friends with my husband in high school. They both said that my grandpa was like their guardian angel.
Wow, I don't even know what to say really, but wow.
My grandpa's a remarkable man, even if we don't always see eye to eye now. I have a lot of respect for him. He taught me a lot. He helped save so many people. I think that's his ability, to always be there to be a savior when people need him. The images in his mind he has to live with, I think that's the curse to him. It eats him up, and I can imagine why.
So this has happened more than once with him?
Yes, it has. The other story I know of, he's told me, was about a time he was working at the city after a large mudslide. He said he had a weird feeling that day, and later on in the day, the mudslide happened. He pulled off on the side of the road because he felt drawn to a certain area. He started digging to make sure what he was feeling wasn't a person that was stuck under the debris of the mudslide. He questioned the things he felt a lot, but he wanted to make sure. He dug and dug and dug, and right before he was about to stop, his shovel made a loud sound, like it went into something. The shovel went into the head of a deceased body when he froze. He felt sick. He said, "I thought, what if I just killed this poor lady? But then I knew she was already gone." He quickly called for help, dug her out, and they took her away. He kept digging almost in a frenzy to make sure he left nothing behind. He spent hours. Other people telling him to stop and that it was okay to stop, and he said he couldn't. He had other men help, and all of a sudden he said, "Quiet." In the distance, you could hear the sounds of small cries, but they weren't human cries, they were cats. He ran down into the hole they were digging, and was part of the woman's kitchen where they were digging at this point. He saw a paw trying to open a little cabinet door, and he pulled it open. Out came a kitty, completely untouched. He heard more meows and opened each cabinet, 6 of them in total. There was a kitty in each cabinet, all untouched by the disaster. He grabbed each kitty and took them to safety. He made sure they were cared for, and he asked his friend, that was a veterinarian, why were they in these cabinets? His friend smiled and said, they knew it was coming, trusted their gut, just like you did. This is where the story always ended, and my grandpa told me, girl, no matter what anyone tells you, you listen to that voice in you when it tells you what to do, just like those cats.
That's remarkable. Did your granddad ever get recognition for all the good things that he's done?
I think people really respected him, but no, and he didn't want it. He said, I'm just doing what any good person would do. My grandpa has been through a lot in his life. He went down dark path too, just like we all do. He always ended up being a savior to someone in some way. He told my mom, that's my curse.
What dark paths are?
I don't want to talk about it too much because I don't think it's entirely related to this, but a few years ago, my grandpa did almost die. It was the most afraid I had ever seen him. I'd seen him get bit by snakes. I've seen him pick up anything in the wild like it was nothing. You know, he's not afraid of bears or anything like that. Just a typical farmer that's just not afraid of anything. But this was different. He got severely injured at work. He slipped on the edge of a sidewalk and busted his hip bone, his pelvis, and his ribs. I'll never forget visiting him at the hospital and seeing the fear in his eyes. He held my hand and said, "Allie, I love you." I thought for sure that's the last time I'd ever see him.
Do you want to stop it all, by the way? Are you alright? Or...
No, I'm okay.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So where is he now?
Thankfully, he healed. Even though the pain was so much, he healed. He's a lot different now, and rightfully so. He won't talk about the spiritual world anymore. I think he saw something when he was healing, something that made him even more afraid than the pain. And I know deep in my heart that something caused that accident to happen, and it wasn't something of our world. My grandpa was a pretty healthy man, and slipping and falling, I just can't wrap my head around how it caused all these issues for him. I mean, he's been thrown off racehorses and been fine. I think it was something more. My grandpa is one of the most fearless men I've ever met, just like I said, aside from Pappy, and he was terrified after this happened. He wouldn't speak of anything unknown after his experiences, only of God. He was not a religious person prior to his accident, and that's how I know, because he isn't the only person in my family that turned this way as well.
Well, I'm glad he's okay, truly, because I can imagine how afraid he must have been. Felt almost betrayed by the universe, I suppose. He helped so many, but almost couldn't be helped himself.
Exactly. That's his curse, and it spread to others.
Like who?
My mom.
So your mum has the curse of helping people, but it weighs on her mentally, and she feels drawn to a place at a certain time.
Yes, but it's even stronger than my grandpa's ability. She can see those who passed, just like me. Her ability is different than mine, but similar in certain ways.
Did she have a lot of experiences growing up, like you did?
Nearly exact. Everything she saw was almost exactly how I did.
Well, should we start back at the beginning with your mum?
It's the best way. My mom was born in the 70s. She grew up on a farm. She had a younger brother and a younger sister. My grandma raised them to be very religious, and most of them kept their faith. Each of them believe in the unknown, but my mom is the only one that isn't afraid. Her mother had postpartum depression really bad with both her siblings. My aunt was born with displaced hip bones and had to wear braces on her legs. My mom said my grandma would just cry, sleep, and cry after her sister was born. She felt like she failed as a mother. Her mother didn't leave her bed often unless she had to. My mom had to step in at the age of 8 years old and take care of her brother and sister while her dad worked all day and all night. When my mom was a preteen, they moved to a house about 5 miles from where I live right now.
So this house, is it still there? Is it the house that you grew up in?
It's very similar to the house I grew up in some ways, but appearance-wise, it looks exactly the same.
So what's the history of your mum's childhood home?
It's a very old house. It was built in the late 1700s, early 1800s. The house was a part of the Underground Railroad. The house also had some of the most extreme paranormal activities I had ever heard of. I've been told about the experiences by almost every single one of my adult family members growing up and their neighbors.
Were there any deaths in this house?
Well, there is only one that I know of. I'm sure there were more because it was such an old house, but this death is dark. There was a very wealthy man that owned this home in the early 1800s. There was a large room similar to like a library, and the man was sitting in this room in front of a window at a desk. There was a very bad storm going on while he was at his desk, and lightning came through the window and struck him. He died instantly.
He was struck by lightning and killed. That's insane. So was his spirit seen in the home?
Not that I know of, but there are many spirits seen in this home. The first spirit saw was by my mother. It was a little girl that would sit in a rocking chair in my mom's room. When my mother was about 6 years old, the little girl would sit in a chair across from her while my mom was in bed and rock back and forth and laugh. And when my mom asked if she wanted to go play, she would run into this little door in my mom's bedroom, smaller than a closet, and the closet led into the attic. My mom would play with her and chase her in there, and when my mom went into the attic, the girl disappeared. It really scared my mom, she said, and she would never go back into the doorway again. My uncle has also had an encounter with a friendlier spirit named Trickoff. He told my grandparents Trickoff was the spirit of a Native American little boy that would play with his army toys. My grandparents just wrote it off as having an imaginary friend until they went to put my uncle to bed and they saw his toys moving on their own, like someone was playing with them. My grandma screamed, grabbed my uncle, and left the room. My grandpa stood in awe because he could see the little boy, much like my uncle could, but my grandma couldn't. He wouldn't talk anymore about it. My aunt told me that everyone was sitting around the kitchen table and having dinner, just having a good time, and all of a sudden, the kitchen sink turned on and you could see the sink from the table. And something that looked like blood was coming out of the faucet. Everyone started freaking out, but my grandpa tried to write it off as, oh, it's just the well water turned in colors from rust. But minutes later, this part is insane for me to even say.
A lot of this just has my mind racing. What happened next then?
My grandmother's wedding dress came floating down the staircase. And I know that sounds crazy, but when you have 10 people telling you the same story and it's the same, it's really hard to not believe it happened. And it came floating down the stairs with no one in it, like you'd see in a movie. Everyone ran out of the house screaming, and I have chills even talking about it. And I wasn't even there. I just always remember the fear in everyone's eyes when they would tell me this story, and you can't fake fear like that. The last occurrence I've been told about is Shadow Man. My mother told me she was walking up the staircase in this home, and they were about to move out on the same day because of everything that was going on. She looked behind her, and Shadow Man stood there, and she felt like she couldn't move. She started running, trying to run. She said it was like in a nightmare. You try to run, feel like you got concrete on your legs. You can't move. The harder you try, the slower you move. He was right behind me. I could feel it on the back of my neck. And when I got to the top of the steps, he was gone.
I can't imagine what went through her mind. It's just a living hell. This wasn't the first time she saw Shadow Man, right?
No, and it wouldn't be the last. The first time she saw Shadow Man was at my great-grandparents' house on, Shadowway Drive. She said she talked to my pappy before going into their bedroom to get a toy or something she left in there. She walked into their bedroom, and Shadow Man was laying on their bed with his legs crossed, holding a book. This time that she saw him, he had glowing yellow eyes. She said that she heard him laugh. It was deep, it was growly, muffled sound. She ran out, and Pappy was standing right there in the doorway and looked alert. I always wonder if maybe Pappy saw Shadow Man or knew about it, but I can't say for sure.
I wish I knew what to say, but I'm kind of on the edge of my seat. I'm sorry your family's gone through all of this. I can't imagine what it must do to all of your minds now.
It's like having PTSD, but you can't go to the doctor and say, hey, I've been tormented by demons, what can I do to get rid of this? It's miserable. The nightmares, the night terrors, the lack of sleep, anxiety, panic attacks. My family is strong. We're stronger than we have to be, or should have to be. My mom, much like my grandpa, as I said earlier, has more to her story than this, but I'll save that for her to tell you all.
So, where do we go next in your story?
When my mother met my father, and the real living hell came for them shortly after.
And what was the living hell?